Good afternoon and welcome to the TalentReach hosted virtual event, The Future of Puget Sound Tech in 2022. My name is David Obelts and I am the co-founder of the Badon Hill Group, a marketing agency that makes big business marketing available for everyone. I will be your facilitator today. Here are some tips for the best experience. The quality of the webinar is only as good as the worst connection between you and our presenters. You can resolve most connection issues by exiting and rejoining the webinar. I would also like to remind you this webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand later in the week. We'll be taking your questions for our panelists for an interactive panel discussion and Q&A at the end. You can submit your questions in the group chat or via email at webinar.questions@badonhillgroup.com. That's webinar.questions@badonhillgroup.com. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Helen Farid of TalentReach.
Thanks so much, David. And welcome back to the newest edition of our TalentReach webinar series. As hope continues to grow and we settle into our new normal, we thought it would be important to get our group together and discuss consistent questions we're hearing, like, what does the future of tech look like in Seattle post-COVID? How will tech companies adapt to having more remote employees? And how do we pivot to ensure growth without sacrificing our company culture? But before we dive deep into this conversation, it's important that we acknowledge just how far we've all come. The last couple of years have brought forward unique challenges, to put it lightly, but we've continued to flourish in large part because of you, our incredible community. And we extend a very warm thank you to everyone who has contributed to our cause. We'll continue to elevate our approaches and nurture our partnerships within the greater Puget Sound and beyond as we look to increase our impact. And we invite all of you to be part of that progress. Give us a follow on LinkedIn, and we'll keep you up to date on all of the exciting new events, projects, and triumphs of TalentReach in the coming year. Our goal is to make up for some lost time, so you won't want to miss what we have in store. Now, getting back to the topic at hand, the phenomenal 3-time Emmy Award-winning and renowned online TV host, Matt Lorch, has joined to help us examine how the tech space will take shape in 2022. Matt, it's a pleasure to welcome you. And with that said, please allow me to open the floor to you and our panelists.
Thank you, Helen. And I have to say, it's an absolute pleasure to be with you. Working as a news anchor and reporter for 26 years, the last 10 of those at Q13, what is now Fox 13 in Seattle. I have to say, I've always had a thirst for understanding of where we're headed. And today we are asking that question about the technology industry in the Puget Sound region. Our team of insiders is going to dive into the factors that are shaping the tech industry. And they're going to look into their crystal ball, showing what they expect in 2022. So during this discussion, we're going to talk about the impacts of remote work on the workforce and the mass migration it's causing, the competition for top tech talent, and what that means for employees and management, whether Bellevue and communities outside of Seattle are really poised to eat Seattle's lunch when it comes to attracting tech companies, and a whole lot more. And we want you to play a critical role in this. So throughout this conversation, we're going to be asking your questions to our panelists. David posted the email address where you can ask those questions. I'm going to be watching the chat as well. So feel free to post your questions in the chat. But with that said, let's get to it and introduce you to our panel. First up is John Cook. John is the co-founder of GeekWire, a national technology site and community. He oversees business, event, and community operations and has been covering Puget Sound technology with relentless passion for over 20 years. Also joining us is Lynne Robinson, mayor of Bellevue. She was elected mayor of the city of Bellevue in 2020. She joined the council in 2014 as a champion for startups and small businesses. She holds a doctorate in physical therapy from Regis University, as a member of the King County Affordable Housing Committee. And as I have learned, like me, also has a small dog that runs her house. We're also super excited to be joined by Alex Halverson. Alex is a reporter covering Puget Sound tech, law, and education for the Puget Sound Business Journal. He's incredibly dialed in. He's also worked as a senior producer for the Seattle PI and is a proud graduate of Western Washington University. And we are incredibly honored to have Julie Sandler round out our panel. Julie is a managing director at Pioneer Square Labs, a startup studio and venture capital fund here in Seattle. She's also helping to educate the next generation of talent as an adjunct professor at the UW Foster School of Business, Go Dogs, and was one of 60 people selected as a presidential leadership scholar in 2016. Just an amazing honor. Just a reminder to our panelists, it's time to unmute at this time. And we're talking about the future. So let's kick this off with predictions. Julie, I want to start with you. Please give me your big, bold tech prediction for 2022.
I predict that even in the face of the public market setbacks we're experiencing in tech and growth tech, that Seattle becomes the #2 major metropolitan area behind the Bay Area as far as new venture financing and exits go.
We're #2. It would be a big, bold step. Let me go to John Cook now, co-founder of GeekWire. John, your big, bold tech prediction for 2022.
Gosh, I want to counter Julie first and get into a debate on that. I don't think that's going to happen, Julie. That is a bold prediction. I do not see that happening. In fact, I'll take kind of the opposite approach. I see some serious haircuts coming and valuation decreases for startup companies, and not as many unicorn companies being minted in the Pacific Northwest. These are companies that are privately held startups that are worth more than $1 billion. And we had 9 of those minted in the past 12 months. And I don't think we're going to see that. I think we're going to see a little bit of a down round time for the venture capital crew out there and all the startups. So it's going to be a little belt tightening in the startup ranks.
Differing opinions out of the gate. That's why we pulled together a diverse panel. Let me go to Bellevue Mayor Lynne Robinson. Mayor, your big, bold tech prediction for 2022.
I think this is not just a tech prediction. It's something that'll affect everything. I think that basically we're not going to forget the lessons that we learned in 2020 and 21, the value of the relationships that we have, the value of diversity, and the value of our environment. I think that'll color every decision that we make from here on.
Alex Halverson, tech reporter for the Puget Sound Business Journal, your big, bold prediction for 2022.
Yeah, thanks to the ambitions and the growth of AWS with Amazon, I think a lot of the worry about Amazon's exodus from Seattle is going to reverse, and they're going to hire a lot more in its home city.
All right, Alex, I'm going to come right back to you. So recently we have seen technology make some really big bets, huge acquisitions like Microsoft buying Activision for almost $70 billion in cash. Will that continue in 2022?
I don't see any reason why it wouldn't. These companies are huge. They have so much cash on board, and they've made such big bets now that the only way to go is up. Microsoft reached a huge market cap. And when I talked to analysts and I said, what drove that? And they said, well, adding more value to the company. And what adds value to the company? Making huge buys and making those buys with cash. And I see that happening with other companies as well, right? Amazon exploded during the pandemic because it made a big bet on its operations network. It added 20 something warehouses to the Puget Sound region alone. So I don't see this stopping in 2022. In fact, I just see it getting bigger.
More big bets. Julie, I want to come to you next. So Alex and John, they report on what's happening. You get to hear the ideas and see the trends actually before they make news. So people come to you with some of the most cutting edge, thoughtful innovations in technology, and you get to help them bring those to market. So when it comes to technology, kind of on a macro level, what are you seeing and where are we headed this year?
Yeah, there's several themes that are rising up to the forefront across the tech sector that we're seeing at the early stage. Now we are pre-seed and seed investors, so we've got pretty good line of sight to the companies that are forming here in the region in particular. And some of the themes may not be surprising to folks on the line. We're seeing an explosion of companies that are focused on themes around Web3, decentralized ecosystems, the blockchain, crypto, tokenized ecosystems. We're seeing a lot of folks leave the sort of classic Web 2, vertical SaaS type companies and making forays into that sector. A lot in fintech and vertical fintech in particular, banking and financing solutions for career paths and industries that have been overlooked by sort of next gen fintech. A lot in logistics, go figure, over the course of the pandemic. The need for strong B2C and B2B e-commerce and delivery time is top of mind for a lot of companies. And across the board, lots of discussion around the metaverse and where we're headed with regard to companies big and small in that realm.
We're going to talk more about the metaverse coming up, at a rapidly changing landscape. That's what I'm getting. Mayor Robinson, I want to ask you about the growth in Bellevue. So here was the headline in GeekWire last October. And John, not sure you can take credit for this headline, but I love it. It was a really good one. So feel free to do so if you want. It read, Bellevue's boom, city's tech industry is poised to eat Seattle's lunch, where I got that line at the opening. So here's my question wrapped around this. How is Bellevue embracing and in many ways capitalizing on the expansion of many Seattle-based tech companies?
Well, first of all, I want to say you really have to have success on both sides of the lake for this region to succeed as a whole. And so we're rooting for Seattle to get solid feet back on the ground. Bellevue planned for this growth. We started in 2014 when we signed the MOU for light rail. And then in 2017, when we upzoned our downtown. We've been planning for this growth for a long time. We're thrilled that companies are taking advantage of the opportunity to develop here. And our downtown is only 70% built out. We still have Bell Red, Wilburton, and Eastgate to develop. So we're pretty happy about it.
Well, I see all those cranes in downtown Bellevue, so it's exciting that there's more to come. John, let me come to you next with a question about remote work, because you have covered this so extensively. Is the workplace forever changed when it comes to the mass migration of tech workers moving out of Seattle, and where are they moving?
I think it has changed. I think it's changed across the entire country, though. It's not just a Seattle phenomenon. So I think you are seeing, especially in the tech workforce, people wanting to work where they want to work. And I think that is something that is here to stay. And I think it's going to potentially benefit our country and society as we spread workers out to other locations. I think you see companies like Zillow, which is headquartered in downtown Seattle, which is very much taking a remote first approach. Other companies are slowly bringing folks back, but I don't think they're going to bring them back for 5 days a week. You're seeing a lot of hybrid workforces, and they're requiring maybe 3 days a week in the office. And I think that's just going to shake up how we work for the rest of our lives, for sure. And I think some of this is really good as well. I mean, I think it provides more opportunity for people to work where and how they want. So I don't see this changing at all. In fact, I think it's only going to continue.
And you mentioned they're moving to the 3 Bs. It was something that stuck with me. I think you said it was Bend, Boise, and Bozeman, and then people are just picking lifestyle if they can work from anywhere. And those are 3 hotspots for people to move out of the Pacific Northwest.
I think so. I mean, well, the other B I had was Bellingham, but we'll throw Bozeman in there too, because I think that is that's true as well. I think people are just reevaluating. I mean, the COVID was such a dramatic impact on so many people. It really did force people to take a look at where they work, how they work, and where they live. And I think those are places that people are looking to go to. Now, not everyone is fleeing Seattle. In fact, if you look at the numbers, there's still a great migration of talent. And when we speak about the tech industry, especially tech talent that's being imported into Seattle, unlike the Bay Area, which is seeing a pretty big migration out. And so this is for a subset of people, but I think that's a good thing, that folks will live where they want to live and work how they want to work.
Well, I know Alex says Bellingham is a very nice B to live in after spending some time there. All right, as promised, we want all of you watching to be a part of this conversation, and that includes getting to your questions. So let me kick it over to David for our first viewer question. David, what are you seeing?
Yeah, John, I got a question which is attaches to the ongoing conversation. This is from Mary. Mary is asking, we're seeing in the news about the empty core in downtown and the empty offices. What's going to be the long-term impact for that? And how is that hurting small businesses that are supported by those tech workers in those areas?
Great. I think that was directed at me, so I'll hop in. This is a story we've been covering at GeekWire pretty aggressively because we're concerned as we look at the downtown core. And it's not just coming back from COVID. We had a story recently where the crime rates in downtown Seattle are really causing many companies to evaluate where they want to be. And I think we've also covered this in relation to Bellevue, and Mayor Robinson can talk about this, but the number of companies we run into that are evaluating their plans in Seattle, in downtown Seattle, and whether that's the place they want to grow, they're numerous. And I think it's a real problem. I was just at the Downtown Seattle Association annual event last week, and this is forefront for the city, and it's a problem that needs to be addressed, and or else we're going to lose businesses to surrounding areas or those 4Bs.
Let me go to Mayor Robinson. Mayor Robinson, are you hearing that from companies wanting to expand from Seattle into Bellevue, that they have public safety concerns? And how do you continue to provide a safe community in Bellevue as it continues to grow and change?
Well, I think maybe we're the 5th B. But
well played.
I definitely think that what companies are looking for is what their employees want. And what the employees want is high public safety, excellent public schools. Whatever is good for the kid is going to be good for your city. And that really dictates a lot of what companies are looking for their employees. So alternate forms of transportation, safe bike routes, safe walking routes, the light rail, the rapid bus lines, access to parks and green spaces, all those things make for a high quality of life for employees, and that's what employers are looking for. But I think also they're looking for a city that they can collaborate with.
Fantastic. I want to talk about the fight going on between tech companies to land top talent and how that's now reshaping this industry. So as many of you know, in February, Amazon more than doubled its max base pay to $350,000 for corporate and tech workers. At the end of last year, T-Mobile raised its minimum wage to $20 an hour to attract workers. Alex, do you expect the labor shortage to continue during 2022? And what continued impact could that have on the industry and the workforce?
Yeah, I'm no labor reporter, so I can't totally tell, but I would think so. And, like you said, companies are taking notice of, what workers want, and what that is higher compensation. Companies are coming into Seattle and offering more. If you look at, levels.fyi, which is this website where people submit compensation packages, companies like TikTok are coming in and offering way more than Amazon and Microsoft. Facebook offers more. It looks like Apple offers way more. So the companies that are here, they can only rest on their, laurels of being the hometown and being the biggest company for so long. And software engineers are going to move, to the TikToks and the Facebooks.
Julie, with that in mind, I'd love to come to you next, because the big tech companies that Alex was just talking about, they can raise their maximum salaries, their compensation, their base pay. It's much harder for startups to do that. So how are startups competing for the top recruits in this really competitive landscape?
It's interesting, if you're looking at early stage companies, we're talking, pre-seed, seed, Series A stage. I mean, there's just no way in heck that you could possibly compete with Facebook or Google or Microsoft or Amazon. I mean, some of these compensation packages that we're seeing and candidates that we're interviewing for not even executive roles at our portfolio companies are unbelievable. We're talking like 7-figure cash packages for 26-year-old engineers and data scientists, and there's just no way that an early stage startup can compete on that front. That said, there's been I think two positive net effects on startups through all of that. One, there's just been unbelievable talent inflow into the region. I think John said earlier that a lot of folks have left the Bay Area. Turns out the Seattle and greater Seattle area are receiving the most of that talent. In fact, number one for talent migration out of SF has been to Washington State and the greater Seattle area. And because of that, there's a lot of folks who've been here now for the past few years who perhaps are getting a little bit tired of working in the satellite office or working for the big company and are looking for different things other than just pure compensation. They're looking for career opportunities and challenges and the opportunity to create and build something new. So the candidates that we see applying to startups now are much more self-selective, and they are much more inclined to take a role at a startup than before, where we were competing more directly with Amazon and Facebook engineers and product managers who had those really great options too. That said, the long-term impact of this, I think, will be very positive for the startup ecosystem as more and more of these success stories play out and folks working at big companies see how exciting it is to be a part of these, great unicorn stories that John alluded to. You're going to see a lot more appetite here in Seattle, I think, for early stage leaps that folks make from these very well-paying positions.
So, John, I would love for you to chime in on this as well. So it seems like big companies are having to change their tactics when it comes to recruiting. Does that tell us who has the leverage right now in this equation, that it's the workers? And do we expect that to change at all in 2022?
I think workers do have leverage right now, and a top engineer is going to have multiple offers in front of him or her. And I think that's just the way it is. I don't see that changing because there is such a talent shortage right now, especially when you get into these specialty fields. So certainly in specific areas, and AI, machine learning, robotics, there's just, these folks are in such high demand that the offers will continue to flow and those prices will probably continue to go up for them. And I should say, this is one of the reasons why the startup companies that Julie invests in are raising these massive amounts of capital, and why we've seen so many unicorns. It's in part, so not that they can just develop their product and, the product folks, it's also so that they can attract and retain talent. That's a big part of it.
Mayor Robinson, we've talked about the competition to attract great workers in 2022 and that companies are really having to change their approach. Is the same dynamic having to change their approach between cities and companies? Are cities having to offer more incentives to attract and retain big tech companies? And how has Bellevue played a role in all of that?
That's a great question. Bellevue doesn't offer any incentives to any companies, but we do work with the companies. And, like when REI decided to have their headquarters in Bellevue, even though that was short-lived, they made a huge impact in asking that we complete the East Trail ped bike north-south route along the train tracks by 2023. And so we jumped on and started doing everything we had to do to make that happen. Our T-Mobile wanted a better off-ramp in Factoria, so we worked with WashDOT to make that happen and to complete another ped bike route in the Mountains of Sound Greenway in that region. So I think by collaborating with the companies that want to be here, we can provide them with what they're looking for their company and for their employees. And I would also say one thing that Bellevue really has going for it is what they call a mature workforce. And I think we have that because when people retire or quit their jobs in mid-career, they stay in Bellevue and then they start looking for other jobs or for doing startups, as we're talking about. But we don't have people leaving the area as much as maybe other cities might have.
People available for that second and third career. Mm-hmm. Julia, I'd love to come back to you on this next one. So you grew up here in Western Washington, as did I, and we have seen massive changes in the Puget Sound region, in large part due to the success of our technology companies. Is there any indication that the explosive growth of Western Washington driven by tech companies will slow in the coming year or years?
Well, it's really hard to answer that question because there's this confounding variable in the mix, which has been Amazon. And Amazon's growth over the past decade is extremely unique growth and acceleration story for any major metropolitan area. So inevitably for Amazon, the growth will have to slow it'll decelerate. The growth will continue, but it'll decelerate. But in terms of what that means for overall Seattle growth, I think it's going to continue to build off of the very strong effects we've been seeing. There are, Now, not only this next great generation of new companies that have been built, but these large, product and engineering centers that are exploding in growth here too. That'll all contribute to continued growth. As to whether the actual rate will be able to compete with the past 10 years, it's probably unlikely unless we see another company take on the trajectory of an Amazon.
So let's talk about that. Alex, I know you cover Amazon and Microsoft very closely. What other technology companies are you going to be watching closely in 2022 as Julie kind of presents this scenario? Will we see another, company explode here in the Pacific Northwest over the course of the next decade? But what are you watching in this next year and why?
Yeah, one company I'm really looking at and I'm checking in constantly with is Facebook. They added, as Mayor Robinson knows, they added a bunch of office space in Bellevue. Their Northwest lead, Rajiv Rajan, kind of affectionately referred to it as their second Menlo Park. And they're adding more office space, in Sodo District. They have office space in Westlake. And when you talk to them, they really like the Pacific Northwest. Their metaverse ambitions, a lot of those jobs are, centered here. There's virtual reality people here, extended reality, augmented reality. One of their executives told me that the critical mass of their remote team is in the Pacific Northwest. So they're really bullish on the region. I think they're only going to expand, and they seem to genuinely like it here.
Alex, you went there. Let's go there. Let's talk about the metaverse. And Julie mentioned this earlier. First of all, I feel like everybody hears this word metaverse. Very few of us actually understand what it actually means. And I think maybe it's because we're all trying to still figure it out. John, in your view, what does it mean? Are we already there as we host this conversation online? And how is the metaverse going to impact our future this year and in years to come?
Well, the crazy thing about the metaverse is really this augmented or virtual reality world that we live and interact in. And the concept has been around for years. So the fact that it's now this hot buzzworthy term is a little bit of rebranding on promise of technology that really hasn't taken root. I think there's a nugget of something here that's going to grow into something, but as in everything in the tech industry, it usually takes about 7 to 10 years longer than what folks are predicting. I remember at the GeekWire Summit several years ago, we had a venture capitalist on stage saying that I think it was just going to be his daughter that was going to be never going to have to learn how to drive a vehicle because there were going to be autonomous vehicles by that time. Well, that never happened. Well, hasn't not never happened, but it's very slow. This stuff takes time to really take root and really penetrate society. And I think that's going to be the case with the metaverse. I just don't see it happening until the next generation. And I'll put this in the context of my 12-year-old son, who essentially is living in the metaverse. When he is 25 to 30, I think that will probably be commonplace based on how he spends his time, how he interacts with his friends, and when he becomes of working age, how he's going to work. But that is 10 to 15 years off.
We can't get our kids off their phones now. How are we going to communicate with them in the future? But I saw both Julie and Alex nodding. Either one of you want to chime in on where the metaverse is and what it's going to look like over the next few years?
Yeah, I think we're already living in the metaverse. There's this notion of the metaverse that a lot of folks have in mind, which is sort of the Ready Player One scenario where we all have, glasses and goggles over our eyes all the time and, holding our phones up for everything. And, to me, like I look at, my day, and I suspect the day of a lot of folks on this call. I mean, the average American picks up their telephone 340 some times a day. I spend like a good chunk of people on this call my entire day interacting by looking at a piece of like recycled aluminum and glass that I'm talking to you all through right now. Like when I think about, an interesting story or fact that I heard, I have a hard time remembering whether I heard it from a friend over coffee or by reading it on social media. Like we are just unable to like differentiate, our real world interactions and learnings from, especially over the past couple of years, what's become the rhythm and motion of our lives. So the metaverse may be more in 2D right now. We're maybe experiencing it more through the kind of screens that we look at in the second dimension, but I think we're already there, and we're just kind of waiting for the next phase of the simulation, as it were.
It's so intertwined, we don't even realize it. Alex, anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I share the same sort of cynical view that maybe John has, that it feels like a rebranding opportunity in large parts. It seems like the way the metaverse is sold to us that we're going to be, fully into it, when I don't know, it seems more realistic that, like Julie said, we're in and out of it, right? We're on virtual calls, and then we meet a friend for coffee. We're texting people, and then we're, talking to our partner. I I just think of like how the internet is now. Can the internet even support a metaverse? I mean, my parents live on Paulsbo, which is a rural suburb of Seattle, and their internet stinks. They can barely stream a movie. So I don't know how the metaverse is going to work for a pretty significant portion of the population if we have to live fully online.
To John's point, these things are often incremental. The relationships between elected leaders in Seattle and some of its biggest companies has become fractured recently. The CEO of Amazon, Andy Jassy, called his relationship with the Seattle City Council rocky. So Mayor Robinson, Seattle's pain appears to be Bellevue's gain. And I know you had this message earlier that we're all in this together. And I agree with you. It is an inclusive message, but how has Bellevue created these healthy relationships with these big companies? And how does that continue into 2022 and beyond?
It's multifaceted, whether it's the city manager, the city council, the mayor, or the planning department with the developments going on. We have to all work together. And I think that those relationships have to be good on all those levels. But personally, I see our large employers as community partners, and I have this expectation that they are going to collaborate with us. And I've seen wonderful examples of that. Microsoft has always been a really good community partner in Bellevue, and Amazon has followed suit during COVID. Our large employers, they donated millions of dollars to our human services funds for rental assistance, for small business assistance. Like I talked about with REI inspiring us to do the East Trail, and now REI, Meta, and Amazon have all paid in to get that completed early and not just have to wait for state funding to get that done. So, and also I should say Microsoft and Amazon have contributed significantly to retaining affordable housing in Bellevue and developing workforce housing. So contributing to our affordable housing units. I appreciate that. I appreciate the open lines of communications that we have. I just toured one of Amazon's new buildings yesterday, and I like to meet with these companies, and I hope to continue doing that.
Excellent. Yeah, it is good to see these big companies be part of our community solutions. With that said, let's bring in more of your questions. David, I'm going to send it back over to you. What do you have?
Yeah, actually, I have a question that links back kind of to the metaverse question. Where do you see support for digital health companies in the region? And where would you see the metaverse playing in digital health beyond just the Zoom meeting with your doctor?
Julie, we had talked about telehealth. Would you like to tackle that question?
Sure. Yeah. Over the course of the pandemic, there's no question that the use of technology and the delivery of all types of care has been top of mind across health systems, across providers, and across payers, and certainly patients too. It breaks down into a few areas. Prevention and monitoring. The remote patient monitoring movement has taken hold. We've made a couple of investments in that space. We actually, over the course of the pandemic, one of our portfolio companies, Alerted Healthcare, was acquired by Carbon Health, focused in that exact category. And the way that you convey data to your provider is being completely revolutionized by this category of companies. There's certainly classic telehealth that we're seeing, not only for regular patient care visits, but maternal health and general primary care, mental health. Those have been key areas for us too, from an investment perspective. And we're seeing a lot of support for that here in the region, both in terms of new company formation and funding. And I think it's going to continue to be a theme. A lot of folks, don't like going in to appointments where they don't need to be physically there in person. And with all of the different, commoditized devices we can use at home to understand our health, I think the sky's the limit for this category, both in general and certainly in the region.
the next generation of healthcare. Alex, John, anything else to chime in on how technology is going to play a larger role in healthcare in the coming months and years?
I'll hop in there real quick. I agree with Julie. I think this is a really hot area. When Julie was listing all the things that she's investing in and their hot sectors, I think this is a really hot one. And I think it's an area where Seattle has some really interesting DNA, especially as you see the convergence of cloud, AI, machine learning with the health space. And I think you see that playing out with a number of startup companies, but larger companies that are playing in this arena, including Microsoft and Amazon. So this is a big area, and obviously there's just massive amounts of money in healthcare, and it needs transformed. It's one of the last industries probably to be transformed by the digital revolution, and I think we're at the cusp of it.
Alex, you were nodding. Jump in as well.
Yeah, I just loved what John said about, the DNA of healthcare in the region. If you go to Mohi, there's a bunch of exhibits of devices that were built here and invented here and everything. And like he said, it's one of the last industries that kind of needs that digital transformation. There's so much data when it comes to healthcare, right? For each individual patient, there's years of data, obviously. And whether, you can tackle that through these, data lakes that cloud companies have, machine learning to, do predictive care. There's just so much untapped potential that I'm sure they're trying to tap now.
Hey, Matt, as a healthcare professional, I'll tell you.
Oh, thank you.
I so agree with what's being said here. And I think that when it comes to privacy and accuracy, blockchain technology is going to be really instrumental for healthcare. And the AR, VR world, being able to help surgery in remote places by having, a very top surgeon on one end of a augmented reality device guiding a surgeon on the other end. I mean, we've seen that in the Arctic be successful. I think it's going to really make healthcare more equitable and more accessible.
And that's so important for so many segments of our population. Thank you, Mayor. Julie, I want to come back to you. You were voted GeekWire's 2014 Geek of the Year for your work in supporting women innovators. I know it's a great title, right? Geek of the Year. Assess how far we have come since 2014. And when it comes to women in positions of power in technology companies, how much work still needs to be done so we have real gender equality?
Well, it's at every layer of the stack. It's employees, it's C-suites, it's boards, it's the folks investing in companies, it's the folks who are making decisions around, business development and M&A pathways. There's been vast disparity across every one of those layers. And what has been heartening to see is that there's been not only positive progress from a data and numbers perspective across every layer of that stack, but there's been stronger intention and conversation that has been institutionalized more and more in companies and industries alike. In the venture sector, that has been famously and almost in a cringeworthy way, very well known for having few women investors, few investors of color, in part over the past 4 years, and particularly since a lot of the movements that were spurred by a recent presidential administration. A lot of firms are being much more deliberate around who they hire, who they promote, and who they have in their decision-making seats. A lot of organizations too supporting women and individuals of color across sectors have been really fantastic to see take hold. In my industry, Allraise has played a very pivotal role there and has grown. I think the percentage of women and individual of color decision makers at investment firms from like 2% to about 12 to 14. Still a long way to go, but in a very short time frame, some positive momentum to be sure.
That's good to hear. Mayor Robinson, we've been talking a lot about growth, and as Bellevue grows and its urban center becomes more populated, how do you maintain that quality of life, that sense of safety and security, so that it is still an attractive place for tech companies and employees to move there?
Well, I think, a lot of what attracts companies and their employees is the character of your city. And what creates that character are the people who live and work here and the small businesses. So it's really important to invest in those things and keep a relationship with them so you understand what the challenges are and how you can support them. We do that with small business support programs. We have neighborhood programs. We have community conversations. But I also think that just maintaining your investments in public safety and the public education in your parks and in your transportation and access to healthcare are really important.
John, I want to come back to you. We talked about Facebook earlier. You know, in 2021, we saw a real pushback from individual users to Congress on Facebook and other social media and technology platforms. Do we expect that to increase in 2022? And what could be the economic implications of that?
Yes, it will increase. I think it's going to be driven by consumers as much as it is by any sort of government regulation.
How do you see that playing out via consumers?
Well, I think there's a real backlash against Facebook. I would hate to be in Mark Zuckerberg's shoes. I think the company is spiraling. I think their metaverse, half court shot is a long one. Certainly they're well positioned with Oculus, but I don't think anyone trusts Facebook to be the company that's driving the bus on the metaverse. And that's what they're staking their claim on. It's far out. And so, it's not great to be a company when you're attacked by everybody. And essentially that's where Facebook is now. So I don't think they are in a great position. And you've seen a pretty significant haircut on their stock price, but I don't see a turnaround. Now, as Alex said, I mean, they pay an incredible amount of money to people. But at some point, I think they are going to start losing talent, and I don't know. I just don't see great prospects for them across their entire business. And let me say one more thing, because we talk a lot about Facebook and social media companies, and it kind of rubs me the wrong way, because they kind of get to define the tech industry. The tech industry is so much more than social media. It's what we were talking about before. It's the transformation of digital health. It's biotechnology. It's cloud computing. It's the stuff that powers our communications. And we end up talking a ton about social media and Facebook. I don't think it's the most important technology in 2022.
Good reminder, I think, for all of us. Why do you think that is? Why do we fall into that trap? And when we think about technology, we focus on social.
It's consumer oriented. It's sexy. It's certainly sexier than some, SaaS application that's helping you fill out your expense form better. That's not really that fun to talk about. But, Facebook and how you communicate and the metaverse, I mean, it's a sexy topic, but I like the boring stuff.
I'm glad you do. You can't think about where we're going without reflecting on what we've all gone through over the past 2 years. So, Alex, we hope we're coming out of the pandemic now. Vaccine mandates were a really hot button issue in so many workplaces, including technology companies. What does it tell us about the future of these big employers making demands on their workforces, and who really has the power in this dynamic?
Yeah, I believe in tech. Labor seems to have the power. Every time one of these companies, it says we're going to have a vaccine mandate or we're sending you back to the office, a lot of people I talk to that work with those companies are like, I'm not going to do that, or yeah, maybe I'll do that. One person told me, if Amazon tells me to go back, I'll just get a different job. I don't care. So I think it's a unique industry in that labor has so much power, and I think people sometimes don't think of tech employees as labor because frankly they make more money relative to manufacturing jobs around here. But a software engineer who's making 300,000 is still labor. They're not management. And I think you're seeing them flex that leverage over their employees, because at the end of the day, the companies need these software engineers to, stick around for a few years to have institutional knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Julie, you're an adjunct professor at the UW Foster School of Business. You teach an MBA course on entrepreneurship. You are coaching and teaching the talent of the future. How have you seen a change in their thought process over the years?
Well, I've been teaching for about 8 years, and in a class of about 80 people, I would say maybe there were 1 or 2 students who were seriously considering making a leap to a startup or starting a company themselves. These days, it's again sort of a self-selecting group in my class, but there's probably over 10 that are looking at that immediately as far as post-graduation planning. And I think one of the things that has changed in recent history is we now have all of these stories of people who, young in their careers decided to try something crazy, start a new company, make the leap, and they're doing it here in Seattle. And I think students at the University of Washington and across the state at large recognize that, hey, this is possible. And there's a bunch of tailwinds behind me, especially given all the innovation that's happening right now, coming out of the pandemic or not. So that's been really exciting to see. And as an investor, I love the fact that I get first line of sight.
So it's access that most people know somebody who's hit it big on a startup and been a part of starting something special and it actually working out. And that if they can do it, why can't I? Is that kind of what's being practiced?
That's right. Success begets success. And, I think you see that across every geography in the US where you've seen a lot of the positive effects that we're seeing in Seattle. This is the case in LA, again in Boston and in Chicago. I'm really excited by the growth that Seattle has seen on that front. It's in part led by the next generation. And it's part of the reason why my prediction around our relative growth to other cities is top of mind for me going into this year.
Thank you for that. So as promised, we want to leave some time here at the end of our program for your questions, and then we'll have some closing thoughts. For more on that, let me send it over to you, David. I know many people have posted questions in the chat and you've received some emails as well. What are we asking?
Yeah, we've got two really good questions. I'm going to do one from email first. This question is about security and the ongoing situation in Russia and Ukraine. What are people's thoughts on the potential exposure to tech and cloud to cyber attacks and other issues, and how prepared are tech companies in general to deal with this?
Does anybody want to jump on that? Is that something that you're hearing, Alex and John, as you cover the industry, that there's any greater concerns over cybersecurity than there were before the invasion?
I think so.
Go ahead, John.
Go ahead, Alex. Yeah, I have a very short answer. I think so, and I'm not a cybersecurity expert, but yes, I think there's heightened awareness around this issue, and I don't see that slowing down. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I think I would agree with John, maybe just hedge it a little bit that there was already such a heightened sense of security, over the last few years, especially from companies like Microsoft. They're really serious about cybersecurity. Most of their acquisitions over the past 2 years have been cybersecurity companies. So maybe it's greater, obviously, with, a global conflict that could reach into the cyber world. But yeah, generally agree with John.
Mayor, anything to add on that? Are you hearing from any of your constituents about what cities like Bellevue can do in this time where we all feel helpless and want to make a difference for those in Ukraine?
Oh, I think, that's probably a big issue I'm not hearing about, but I know, cybersecurity is huge. We have many, many companies in Bellevue that provide that. And I'm sure everybody's looking at how best to do it.
Fantastic. David, other questions?
Yeah, the next question I've got is, where does 5G evolution impact the discussion of tech enablement? I think it's a great question because personally, I am underwhelmed with my 5G service.
Well, 5G is a little bit like the metaverse, a little bit of a branding exercise. It does represent the next wireless network. And we actually just had a story on T-Mobile, and I was surprised by this stat, but they said that 50% of its network traffic is now running over 5G. So that's surprising to me. Because you hear about it and it's like, oh, we're not quite there yet in terms of the applications that are really necessary, that are needed on 5G. But I think this is an evolution, and you're certainly going to see additional applications built for that 5G ecosystem.
Anybody else on 5G and its impact? No. David, next question.
Yeah, next question I think is a good one for John. Looking ahead, what are the biggest roadblocks that could hamper the Puget Sound region's tech ecosystem? I know we've talked about it broadly, but.
Yeah, I think we've talked about some of them, and I guess it does relate to both I loved what Mayor Robinson was saying there. You know, we need success on both sides of the lake. We really do need to think about ourselves as a region to solve some of the challenging problems that we have, whether that's affordable housing or homelessness. I mean, these are issues that do impact the entire region. I think Seattle probably is kind of becomes the poster child for it, and you see it probably more in your face in Seattle, but this is an issue that we face as an entire region. And I think it really does come down to housing and the economics that are at play here, because we are moving towards, I don't think we're towards San Francisco yet, but we're moving towards that environment where it's essentially the haves and have-nots. And we need to make sure as we build our community and build this region that the rising tide is lifting all boats. It hasn't. The tech community has to do more to make sure that happens. You do see some positive momentum here with the initiatives that Amazon and Microsoft are doing as it relates to affordable housing. But we can't be in a region where a firefighter and a teacher don't live on the same block as a software engineer and a co-founder of a company. We need to make sure that mix is in our neighborhoods, from Bellevue to Burien to Ballard.
So with that said, let's go to Mayor Robinson as a policymaker, as an elected leader. How do we kind of make sure that we live in this, balanced community that John was just laying out, when there are great discrepancies in what some are making compared to those who work in the higher ends of technology?
I'm glad you asked me, because I was kind of chomping at the bit to weigh in. Just on the tech ecosystem, to start with, to Julie's point, the startups are real energy and feeder companies for the large companies. Our large companies buy their ideas, they buy their companies, they buy their employees. And it really, that energy, that synergy is so vital to the whole tech ecosystem. I think one of the best things I ever did was convince our city to take an old building that they owned and turn it into a low rent office space for our tech startups. And it was apple green. It was a total 70s building, and it was full of all these different companies. And then it got torn down for light rail. But, as the cost of living just goes up astronomically, we have to prepare for the entire population, that we have the full spectrum of housing available. I think people need to be paid more. I think anybody willing to work 40 hours a week should be paid a living wage. And I think we need to create that spectrum of affordabilities and opportunities, so you can live without a car if you choose to, and you can have a smaller space and live in a very expensive city with lots of opportunity.
Important message. David, I think we have time for one more question before we wrap it up with our key takeaways.
Yeah, this question is from Michelle, and I'm going to summarize her question a little bit. It involves drones and the battle for aerospace and tech engineers in that space. We have this interesting point that we're at right now, where we have Boeing, SpaceX, and Amazon, among other companies, fighting for the same talent. What are your all's thoughts on drones, space travel, and Boeing that just wants to build airplanes?
I'll say that we have a very old company in Bellevue called PACCAR. That was the first high rise in Bellevue, and now it's like an antique in our city. But to see a company like that doing autonomous semi trucks and battery operated semi trucks for ground transportation is really inspiring. So it's not just these companies. We have so much innovation in this area. We need to support it. And I think that to get the employees needed to serve those companies, we need to have lots of opportunity for education, whether it's in the public school system, or through our coding schools and our like Bellevue College and our community colleges. It's really important to create access for learning.
All right. With that said, we want to wrap things up with some final thoughts. So we're going to go to each of our panelists for their key takeaways. Julie, I'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. We talked about this one earlier that, while there is this mass migration, we're seeing, to Washington from a lot of different geographies, we are seeing, to the points that Mayor Robinson and John were just making, sort of a troubling dynamic with both residents as well as companies leaving Seattle proper itself for, for other regions and other, nearby towns. So what happens to the downtown core is top of mind for us, and I think for a lot of folks on the call. Hybrid workforces are winning local talent wars. I think John made this point beautifully. It's rare these days to see a company that's all in, 5 days a week in person, or companies that are completely not open at all to any headquarters, although those are in fact more common. I do see here in Seattle the 2 or 3 day a week hybrid office dynamic as winning most of these wars. And then lastly, I think this talent competition we're seeing, while in the short term can feel scary for a lot of up and coming companies, is a net positive for all of us. We'll just see how it plays out in the near term and the tumult we're all experiencing.
A hybrid workplace, you're going to make a lot of people happy if that is here to stay. Alex, I'm going to send it over to you for your key takeaways.
Yeah, Mayor Robinson and I think John Cook said something really great, is that we have to view this this place as a region. And I think tech companies are doing that, especially the big ones, and their footprint is only expanding here. If you're in Amazon, I don't know if you think of Seattle versus Bellevue. I think we have to take them literally when they say the Puget Sound region is their headquarter one. Another one, like we talked about, recruiting is super cutthroat with these companies. Labor has so much power that, the market rate gets set, it's like sports free agency. Every time a software engineer is hired, that market rate clicks up. Especially for the big companies. And then technology is making big bets, and probably some of them it's going to pay off. Amazon and its operations network, that looks like it's paying off. Like John said, the logo shot from Meta to go all in on the metaverse might not pay off.
We will be watching those wagers. Thank you, Alex. Mayor Lynne Robinson, your key takeaways.
I think planning for growth is key. Put your infrastructure in advance of development every time you can. And, bottom line, be the city where people want to be. Everything we've talked about today, about making the place somewhere where companies want to be and where people want to work and live. And just be a good partner. Be a good partner with your companies, with your community members, and with the region.
Words for all of us to live by. Be a good partner. John Cook, your key takeaways.
Yes, deal mania. Will the venture capital and M&A ecosystem just continue to roar as it has in the past year? The venture capital investments in Washington State were up 77% last year to $8.5 billion. This is an insane amount of money that's coming in. People have been calling it mind-boggling and bonkers. I just don't see the rate continuing at that level. So I'm going to say that's my bold prediction. We're going to see a little bit of a reversal there. We've talked a lot about the metaverse, hype versus reality. I agree with Julie. We are kind of living in it if you have the definition of the metaverse as we know it. But longer term, in terms of Mark Zuckerberg's view, I think it's a lot further out. And then remote work and migration. We've talked a lot about that as well. I do think talent is spreading to other places, and talent and workers are in the driver's seat, especially as it relates to technology.
The 5 Bs, they're headed to the 5 Bs, which, as we know from Mayor Robinson, includes Bellevue. So we hope that this was a really valuable and meaningful conversation for you. Thank you for joining us. We want to honor your time. We told you it'd be about an hour, and we're getting out just under that. I know I have a better understanding of where things are headed because of this conversation. Big thanks to our powerhouse panel, John Cook, Julie Sandler, Bellevue Mayor Lynne Robinson, and Alex Halverson. David, over to you with some really important information.
We want to thank TalentReach, Helen, Jeff, Eric, and the rest of the team for hosting this webinar today. This webinar will be available for on-demand replay early next week, and we'll be sending all registered attendees an email with a link. Stay tuned for the next TalentReach hosted webinar coming in the summer of 2022. This concludes our webinar. The Badon Hill Group thanks you once again for joining us and wishes you a great rest of your day.